Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all, even virtually, and thanks for joining us today for this Hard Histories at Hopkins conversation. My name is Martha Jones. I'm the director of Hard Histories at Hopkins and a professor here at the History Department and the SNF Agora Institute. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Hard Histories at Hopkins launched in the fall of 2020, and our charge is to examine the role that race and racism and discrimination have played in the history of Johns Hopkins. We blend research, teaching, public engagement like today, and the creative arts to engage in a frank and informed exploration of some of the myths that have become part of our university story, to replace those myths with histories that are new for so many of us. In spring 2020, we're hosting a series of conversations that explore the history of Blackness, slavery, racism in Maryland. But today we are delighted to welcome our friends from Texas and the Houston area for comparative conversation about the work that is happening there. And so much of it resonates importantly with what we're doing here. So we're going to be joined today by Dr. W. Caleb McDaniel from Rice University and Dr. Marco Robinson from Prairie View A&M. And we will hear about the hard history work they've been engaged in there. But before I bring on our guests, I want to extend a special welcome and appreciation to our friend, John Guest Jr. from the Houston Museum of African American Culture. The museum is our co-sponsor for this event today, and we're deeply honored to once again join forces with you all in this important work. John Guest is the voice and the architect behind the Houston Museum of African American Culture, where he currently serves as Chief Executive Officer. Since 2014, he has curated well-received and reviewed exhibitions. I've seen some of them. They have been remarkable, including Sandra Bland, Abolitionists, Segregation and Democracy, such critical themes in the life of Houston and beyond. John has produced 3 award-winning films, including The Burt, about the late Houston artist Burt Long Jr., which was named one of the 10 all-time best Houston documentaries. His white papers for the museum focus on Houston's economic and racial segregation and the building of cultural capital in the neighborhoods of color to combat the continuance of intergenerational poverty. John Guest is a Johns Hopkins graduate, and his career has included stints at Chase Manhattan Bank in New York City and Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Merrill Lynch. He's given presentations on message, strategy, and culture at the Inc. Magazine Regional Conference, the Alliance of American Museums, and Museum Next, the University of Florida, and the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, and serves on the McKinsey & Company Executive Online Panel that surveys global, national, and industry economic and business performance. John Guest, we're extraordinarily honored to have you with us and to have this opportunity to partner with the Houston Museum of African American Culture. So if I could, I'm going to turn it over to you for your own words of welcome today.
Well, thank you, Martha. I follow the work as well of Hard Histories and have been both inspired and informed by the Agora Institute's many programs such as this one. And I'm thrilled that your conversations have come to highlight what we're doing in Houston to create more just and accurate histories of our institutions and communities. A brief introduction of the Houston Museum of African American Culture. Pre-pandemic, HMAC had become by far the most visited African American cultural asset in the city, ultimately reaching over 50,000 annual visitors. Our exhibitions have been critically acclaimed, including being rated top 5 in the state of Texas with our Vicky Meek retrospective, our Burt Long show, and our current show, Frame of Reference, and have traveled to museums across the country, including New York City, Dallas, and Chicago. Our chief curator has graced the cover of Art in America. Collaborations with New York City's ACA and Jack Shaman galleries allowed us to show the works of master artists, including Faith Ringgold, Romare Bearden, Amina Robinson, Richard Mayhew, and Malik Sidibe. We have sponsored or co-sponsored 2 important symposia with the Johns Hopkins Center for Africana Studies, the African Presence in Mexico and Afropolitans. As Houston's Black Film House, HMAC hosted Houston's advanced screenings of Black Panther and The Hate You Give, and hosted the African Film Festival, as well as community drive-ins and our regular film series. We have been beneficiaries of Ava DuVernay and Array, her film distribution group, at invitation-only national convocations and COVID funding. HMAC was the starting venue for DuVernay's Ford Foundation-funded LEAP Projects mural that currently is at the Equal Justice Initiative headed by Brian Stevenson. HMAC became the first African-American asset to own a Confederate monument, an event covered by national media, including the New York Times and the Smithsonian Magazine, and highlighted in Erin Thompson's new book, Smashing Statues, as an example of how to manage such monuments. We were the only African-American asset nationally to host a Ford Foundation Agnes Gunn-funded Arts for Justice convening of bipartisan statewide leaders from the Texas legislature and the Texas arts community. HMAC is currently partnering with the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto as the first site outside of Canada for viewing of its Kumba Saleh 3020 CE, at 100,000-piece Lego installation of an ancient Ghana kingdom reimagined as an Afrofuturistic nation. We have presented workshops on community relevance and community advocacy at the American Alliance of Museums and Museum Next annual meetings. What makes HMAC different from every other cultural asset is its historical and continuing presence in low-income neighborhoods across the city. From our community message murals to our mural inside Wheatley High School that greets students with the message, "The world needs what you have to give," to our drive-ins to our public art projects. Driving our mission is the ability of cultural assets in low-income neighborhoods to create cultural capital in neighborhood residents. Studies have shown such capital results in higher civic engagement, more confident individuals, and a reduction in poverty, characteristics associated with neighborhoods defined as possessing high opportunity. To build cultural capital in low-income and African-American neighborhoods, we must provide these neighborhoods with cultural assets. As a result, HMAC has become a museum in the building and in the community, expanding our influence as a vehicle of empowerment beyond destination visits. In short, we believe that ending the vestiges of slavery and tackling segregation in our city requires investment in neighborhoods of color. We were delighted to have the opportunity to co-sponsor this important conversation on the connections of Prairie View and Rice universities to the histories of enslavement and discrimination here, because we're concerned about where these specific conversations lead us. The question has been asked, can coming to grips with the histories of slavery and segregation help us to better address the legacies of the past and to keep us from producing or reproducing new forms of racial injustice? A 2015 Richard Florida study ranked Houston number 5 amongst the most income segregated metropolitan areas in the country. As a result, HMAC asked a different question. Can institutions whose beginnings have been shaped by segregation make the community investments required to change their histories and tackle our city's profound segregation? We look forward to this needed conversation about Houston institutions. Again, Martha, thank you. Thank the Angora Institute. Thanks, Johns Hopkins, and thank the distinguished professors from Prairie View and Rice.
Thank you very much, John Gass, and thank you again to the museum for partnering with us and being part of our community across lots of time and space, but in the spirit of the important work that you underscore. We're really honored to have you here. I'm going to invite Dr. McDaniel and Dr. Robinson to join me now. And that means turning on cameras, gentlemen. And let me just please take a moment to introduce you both, and then I want to dive into the conversation. Dr. Marco Robinson is a historian, archival, and qualitative methods specialist. Dr. Robinson is an assistant professor of history and the assistant director of the Ruth J. Simmons Center for Race and Justice at Prairie View A&M University. Dr. Robinson leads the, is it EPA, if I got that right? EPA, do you say?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, committee of the Center for Race and Justice. The committee facilitates several public history and preservation projects uncovering the legacy of slavery and the impact of segregation at Prairie View, Texas's oldest publicly supported historically Black university. Dr. Robinson is a strong advocate for community studies and organizing community archives. He also studies the impact of COVID-19 on Black church congregations in Waller County, Texas. Welcome again, Dr. Robinson. Dr. W. Caleb McDaniel is the Mary Gibbs Jones Professor of the Humanities and Professor of History at Rice University, where he also serves as chair of the Department of History and co-chair of the university's task force on slavery, segregation, and racial injustice. He is the author of Sweet Taste of Liberty, A True Story of Slavery and Restitution in America, which won the 2020 Pulitzer Prize in History and the Civil War and Reconstruction Book Prize from the Organization of American Historians. In addition to his academic articles about the history of slavery and anti-slavery and emancipation in the 19th century, his essays have appeared in the New York Times, Smithsonian, The Atlantic, and Time. Gentlemen, we'll be in conversation for about 20-25 minutes, and then we will have a chance to turn to questions from the audience. So I'll recommend for folks at any point in the conversation to drop your questions in the Q&A function, and they will find their way to me, and I will be delighted to pose them to our guests. So let me get us started. I think one of the reasons I wanted to ask you both here is because it's interesting what we share as institutions. I think Johns Hopkins was not a place that folks were especially expecting to hear a hard history project develop. We were founded after the Civil War, for example, and that seemed to suggest that we were out of the bounds of some of the very foundational work, right, begun, of course, by Dr. Ruth Simmons at Brown University. I think we flew under the radar for a while. Let me start with you, if I could, Dr. Robinson, because I think there is also perhaps a misunderstanding that circulates about historically Black colleges and universities, that somehow HBCUs are beyond the bounds of this hard history work as serving Black communities, as being filled with Black students, and today Black faculty and leaders. So how do you all find yourselves in the midst of this conversation as a historically Black college?
Well, thank you, Dr. Jones, for this opportunity. Also, thank you to the SNF Agora Institute for putting this on, and also the Houston African American Museum, and Mr. Guest for welcoming us today and partnering with you. This work is centered in a letter that President Simmons penned on the eve of the death of George Floyd. And from that, Dr. Melanie Price went forward in establishing the Ruth J. Simmons Center for Race and Justice, and we began the hard work of recovery at Prairie View A&M University. Intricate part of our history is what existed prior on the grounds of Alta Vista Plantations, which is the actual space that we're located now, and what are the experiences of enslaved people who live there. And so that was important to us, and we had a void there, because in terms of our university's narrative, we knew very little about those people who were held there against their own will. And so we wanted our students to know about that. And so our process is a little bit different from Dr. McDaniel's process that they're engaging in at Rice, in the sense that our recovery is along the lines of really fully understanding our identity in terms of that space. And so a couple of things that we've been able to do is to excavate the experience of enslaved woman who was held there on Alta Vista Plantation, Elizabeth Burney. And Jared Kirby, the owner of Alta Vista Plantation, she referred to him as Master Jack. And she stated emphatically in her memoirs that he was a very mean man. You know, she recalled instances where violence occurred, where she saw people beat, the blood ran down her legs, and even violence perpetrated on her where she was stripped naked in one instance, and she was staked, her hands and feet were staked to the ground. And she was beaten so bad that she had to be carried back to the cabin. She could not even walk on her own accord. She talked about the living conditions, the food, and it was overcrowded in the slave quarters, and how they were served spoiled beef with worms in it. And so as we've been uncovering these stories, you know, this is a part of the narrative of the school that we wanted our students to understand, particularly the work of the EPA committee, to where we're trying to understand the legacy of slavery, but more importantly, the impact of segregation moving into the post-Reconstruction era. And so we've have a very robust effort that's going on at Prairie University now, to where we've acquired funding, over $600,000 worth of funding through various organizations, the NEH, Texas Humanities, and other philanthropic foundations, to where we are trying to improve our archives, where we're getting things digitized so that we can produce scholarship on these experiences. And this is a very intricate part of the university's past. And so we want the public to be able to understand kind of this aspect of not only Prairie View's history, but being an intricate part of Texas in the Southern narrative in terms of slavery. You know, Prairie View University being the second oldest university in the state. So our work centered around recovery has been very shaped by kind of the narratives that we've been able to get. There's another enslaved woman, Lucinda, that we've been able to acquire a bill of sales in Galveston that Jared Kirby acquired. We've connected with the Kirby family, the descendants of the Kirby family. We'll be hosting them on campus next month in April. And so we're going to have a open house, kind of town hall meeting about what we've found about the antebellum period, but at the same time, we want to recognize them as partners in our work that we've been doing. And so they provided family papers. They've even provided indigenous artifacts that they found on the grounds from the first Native American groups that lived in that area. And so our excavation and our interrogation of the past has been, you know, even moving past, you know, the antebellum period. And so there's so much that we've been able to find in terms of that space's history, but more importantly, contributing to creating a more holistic narrative around that.
You know, thank you for that, because I think you all have answered one of the questions that we ask at Johns Hopkins, which is in fact our Homewood campus, our arts and sciences and engineering campus, sits on what was once a slaveholding estate. And while that's not an express part of our institutional history, your work, I think, has really encouraged us to appreciate how we cannot turn away from the history of the land and place and the legacies that we inherit when we occupy that place. So it's such a powerful perspective, and the story of the Alta Vista plantation has been a really important one for us to learn from. Dr. McDaniel, let me turn to you, because I want you to tell us, but I suspect that, you know, at Rice, there's another kind of story, which is an institute founded in the 1890s, again, long after slavery's abolition. Really Rice as a 20th century institution with a tremendous pride in driving that chapter of Houston and Texas's history. And yet here you are also touching back to this work begun by Dr. Ruth Simmons and doing your own sort of excavation. So how does Rice find them? How do you find yourselves in this story? Because in that sense, I think like Johns Hopkins, maybe the leaders at Rice thought you were not going to be caught up in the university studying slavery initiative.
Thanks for having me here. I just want to echo Dr. Robinson's gratitude and appreciation for all of the organizers of this event. And it's an honor to be sitting alongside him as well and to learn more about our collective work. So our task force was founded in 2019, and it was explicitly charged with examining the histories of slavery, segregation, and racial injustice as they relate to the history of what was the Rice Institute when it was originally founded and became Rice University in the mid-20th century. And as you noted, we very quickly joined the University Studying Slavery Consortium. I think we were maybe the 66th or 67th school to join this effort that really began with Brown University and President Simmons's visionary work in encouraging institutions like ours to honestly investigate their own histories. But you're right that we also found ourselves joining a group that in many ways was full of institutions not quite like ours. That we were chartered in 1891 with the original gift by William Marsh Rice to establish an institute for white inhabitants of the city of Houston in Texas. The institution did not open its doors until 1912, so there was a period of some 20 years there where the institute did exist in Houston, and it was a powerful financial entity in its own right as an owner of land, since we've been talking about property, as a lender of funds, but really did not open its doors and begin admitting students until 1912, and then did not begin admitting Black students until 1964 or 1965. So we were tasked from the beginning with examining a very wide range of topics over a very long period of time. The reason why slavery was a part of our initial research was because William Marsh Rice, who gave the founding gift in 1891, moved to Texas from Massachusetts at the end of the 1830s and became a wealthy merchant in Houston, and really made his fortune by supplying plantations around Houston, and also by investing in transportation infrastructure and the cotton economy in Texas before the Civil War, and also himself enslaved at least 16 people, and was, through his many financial transactions, entangled in the institution of slavery more broadly. So we've been looking at, in our investigations, everything from the early origins of William Marsh Rice's businesses in Texas in the 1830s all the way up to the present day. So it encompasses the whole history in some ways of slavery and its aftermath and its legacy. So I think the differences between Rice and some of the other schools that have joined this consortium, to me, are as an educator salutary in the sense that they call our attention to the long tail of slavery and segregation into the 20th century. I think if Texans and Americans more generally can understand and come to grips with how an institution that opened its doors in 1912 could still be connected to the history of slavery, then we have a better understanding of what slavery was and how it impacted our society and continues to impact our society to this day.
We also share that important challenge of returning to a namesake, to a founder, right, to a benefactor, and having to not only rethink his life, but then help a university community incorporate all the facets of that life into its thinking about itself. And I know that's been a challenge there, and it's been a challenge here too. One of the other reasons I wanted to talk with you all together is that we share, I think, a deep commitment to having students be critical agents in this work. You know, when we were founding Hard Histories, we looked at a lot of models, and you know, there are many, and some of them put this work in the hands of, you know, elite and experienced researchers. Others create, you know, distinguished commissions and produce white papers. But you all, I think not unlike us, have from the start put this work in the hands of students. And I'm interested to know kind of how you came to that, and what you think that has netted for your work, that maybe other approaches don't benefit from. And if it's okay, Dr. McDaniel, I'll ask you to speak to that role of students first.
Sure. Well, I think for us, you know, one of the guiding lights or principles for us was articulated by President Simmons in some of the writing that she did about the Brown University experience, which is that this is the kind of work that universities at their best do. You know, this isn't work that is separate and apart from the work of universities, that we are academic institutions committed to truth, committed to fact finding, committed to confronting the truth, and to teaching, you know, what we find. And so to me, it's central to our mission as a university to engage students as knowledge producers, as scholars in their own right. And so it seemed natural to, for example, as we have done, offer graduate seminars and undergraduate courses that students could enroll in to conduct this research. I think it's, you know, one benefit of it is that it brings perspectives to the work that perhaps those of us who are more familiar with some of the historical documents or time periods that we're investigating wouldn't necessarily think to ask. Students bring those questions to the table. And in our case, students have really made some important discoveries in the archive that have really been critical to our work. You know, as one example, I mentioned William Marsh Rice and his connections to enslavement. His brother, who was Frederick A. Rice, and also a member of the first board that was overseeing the Institute when it was chartered in 1891, a student researcher going through probate records in Fort Bend County in the suburbs of Houston here, discovered that Frederick A. Rice managed a plantation as part of the estate of his wife's deceased husband. And that opened up a whole new line of inquiry into the people who were enslaved at Edge Hill Plantation and the work that they did to bolster the business enterprises of Frederick A. Rice and William Marsh Rice as brothers and business partners. That's just one example of many I can name of how students have really made some discoveries that no one else had known about before and contributed to the work. And that's universities at its best, in my view.
Yeah, it really is. We have to remind folks sometimes that there's a whole lot that goes on our campuses that folks don't see, right? And much of it is about teaching and learning and those collaborations. So Dr. Robinson, for you, because I know your students have been from the beginning in the trenches with you doing this work. Tell us what you discovered about that and about them through those collaborations.
The students are an integral part of our work, particularly our being a historically Black college. Our interest is connecting students with place and having meaning for that. And so that's been very significant in terms of the impetus for the way we've approached our work. We're approaching it in a very interdisciplinary way because we have architecture students that are working with us also to recreate 3D renderings, and also in a virtual space, recreate the main house of Alta Vista Plantation. We're remapping our campus over decades from the 1850s forward over what existed there. And so we've trying to identify where the slave quarters were, also where the fields and the different aspects of that lived environment that existed on Alta Vista Plantation. And our students are right in the middle of that. Our architecture students, through a program called Lumion, have been putting it together, and I've been working very close with them. We've used oral histories that we did with the family, to kind of pinpoint places where these things existed, from their memoirs that they can recall. But in addition to that, triangulating that with newspaper ads during the Civil War, et cetera. And so when we look at kind of Jared Kirby and the operation he had there, students have been just dug into that. And so we've had searches across our archive for census records. We collected oral histories. And so they've been in the middle of that. In addition to that, we've connected with descendants of enslaved people who were held on the plantation. And so as I mentioned, we'll be inviting them back to campus so that we can more formally conduct oral histories with them during that open house that we're about to host. And so this approach has been very viable because we have another partnership with the University of Texas with Dr. Dinah Berry, where we are working on the Texas Domestic Slave Trade Project, which will be a contributor to that. We just received funding for a collaborative grant on that. And so our students have been working across the board on several projects within the center to excavate that physical history, but more importantly, to get in the archives and to dig up and to formulate things that help us to see this picture in more of a holistic piece. And so I think that our approach to this has broadened our students' horizons. This prepared them for post-baccalaureate studies as a result of their work with us. Not very many undergrads get to work on projects like this, of this nature, to where they're really digging into archives and doing in-depth research, and more importantly, triangulating things that they're finding with other types of data. And so that's provided them with a very rich experience that's going to give them a platform to take them forward for graduate studies.
That's wonderful, because I think that what you both have underscored is also the deep investment, right, that we are making in students. At Johns Hopkins, I remind our students, that yes, they are in the classroom today, but in very short order, they're going to be alums. Some of them are going to sit on alumni boards. Among them will be future trustees and other leaders of the institution. So I think there's a way in which we're making an investment in the long-term resonances of the work when students are in from the ground up. And that's really exciting for me. The other thing that's exciting for me about both of your work is that it is very public facing. At Hard Histories, we have a website that seems quite ordinary these days, I think sort of obligatory. But most recently, we have initiated a Substack, and or I'm supposed to call it the Stack, as someone has advised me.
I'm a loyal reader, by the way, so thank you for that.
Thank you. So our readership is growing, but we really wrestled with the right way, right, to bring our work to communities of concern that include the campus, but go far beyond it. And one of the things I knew is that the way I ordinarily present work, would be in the form of a peer-reviewed article or even a book, and that would take a very long time, and in fact would be undermine, I think, confidence in a way in what we're doing. So our experiment starting back in January has been with the Substack, and thank you for reading, and it is growing. But I want to ask you about your very deliberate kind of public engagement from the beginning on these projects. Maybe I can ask you to go first, Dr. McDaniel. I know about your
yes.
podcast.
Well, I think, like universities generally, the last 2 years have been challenging because of the coronavirus pandemic, and have forced us to be creative about public outreach. We've all gotten familiar with these kinds of webinars, and as we were talking before we began our program today, it's sort of a double-edged sword, because it's easier to reach audiences beyond campus when you have a remote platform like Zoom. And we have held 14 sort of signature webinars that were widely publicized and well attended. But then there's also the campus outreach and engaging people on campus. And, I think most students are probably, I don't know if this is true at your institutions, a little bit tired of Zoom after 2 years of learning in the classroom. So we've been trying to think about creative ways to reach all of those communities, both beyond and on the campus. And one of the things we decided early on to do, Dr. Bird, I should have mentioned even before now, my co-chair on the task force is my colleague in the history department, Alex Bird, who's also the vice provost of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we wanted to seize the opportunity to invite audiences into the work of doing history, because I think it's work that is not always well understood outside of the profession. What takes so long to to do this kind of investigation? It's not as though we can go to the archives and find a folder labeled slavery, segregation, and racial injustice and find everything we need. We have to read between the lines. We have to go into collections that may not at first glance have a relationship to our topic, and then piece together fragments and sources to build a story. So we wanted people to kind of see that process as it unfolded. And so every Friday at noon Central, I invite anyone in the audience who's interested to join us every Friday at noon, not this week because we're on spring break, but generally every Friday at noon, we have a Zoom webinar where Dr. Bird and I just talk through some of the documents that we're examining as part of our research. And it's often very improvisational. It's often very in the moment, because again, we want people to see the process. But then we've also tried to take some of those webinars, and with the help again of student, undergraduate media fellows, have edited them into podcast episodes that are also made available, and anyone can listen to those. And we try a couple of weeks after the recording to do a debrief with each podcast episode, where we're joined by Kate Coley, who's a staff in the alumni office here at Rice, and an alum herself of the university. And we talk about the episode and what questions it raises in light of what's happening on campus at that particular time. So that's one of the things that we've tried to do to invite people into our work.
And I love that what you said about sort of lifting the hood, right, and helping folks to see sort of how we work behind the scenes. I can tell you, look, we've had colleagues here, who are, it's a revelation when they learn how historians work. They're used to reading our books and our articles when everything has been worked out. Now for you, Dr. Robinson, I know some of your public facing work is in this realm of digital humanities, but tell us more about sort of the how and the why of your decision to be so public facing in this work.
Well, first and foremost, I think for us, it was very important that the stories and the narratives around the people that we're depicting, that they had a part and they had a say in there. And so we have a long list of community partners. I will pinpoint one project that we have underway, the Whitechapel Slave Cemetery Project, which was known as a slave cemetery there. We partnered many years ago with Rice, to where they came and they did a study on the cemetery there. But currently we have a company, Paleo West, where we're doing ground penetrating radar to identify the boundaries of the cemetery. But that calls for us to be in contact with the community people that have relatives that are interned there. And so as we're researching and we're excavating this past, we want to make sure that we're connected to the community, because this is not just our story, it's their story too. And so we've been public facing and making sure that we have inclusive histories, that we reached out to all constituents, all groups, so that when we produce our final report, which in 2026, will be the 150th anniversary of the founding of Prairie University. We want to make sure that we did our due diligence in making sure that what we found was inclusive of the experiences of the local community, but more importantly, the national, regional narrative there. We're also a part of the Emancipation Trail, working with the National Park Service right now. So just tying that whole history together to make sure that there's some consistency. More importantly, there's some continuity there too.
Yeah, you know, I've been very inspired by Dr. Hillary Green at the University of Alabama, by the research and the recovery work that she's done, but also by the tours, right? That she's really trying to change the sensibilities of everybody on her campus, visitors, students, administrators, about that very landscape. And there is something really powerful about her model of walking the landscape with people and narrating it, which is something I would love us to consider here in Baltimore. I want to remind folks, you can drop your questions in the chat, and Dr. Robinson already answered one of the questions, which indeed was about the cemetery there. So I thank you for that. But there's another question here that I think takes us back to where I think John Guest was trying to nudge us, right? Which is to, as best we can, be forthcoming about how we aspire, how we hope, how we aim for our work, which so much of which importantly is excavating pasts that have been forgotten, unknown, covered over and more. I think John Guest at the museum was kind of nudging us to think about how that works in the future. And I want you to answer this question in the way that is comfortable for you. But Vicki Meek asks, in what ways is the higher education community in Texas confronting the current push by the state legislature to set limits and bars on intellectual discussion of systemic racism in public education? And without asking you to do a tutorial on the state of the legislation and the politics around it, I do think it's a moment in which we are called on to kind of find a fine point for our work. And in perhaps both of your cases, you began not anticipating where we would be here in the spring of 2022. So Dr. Robinson, would it be okay to ask you to speak to that as much as you're comfortable, and then I'll turn it to Dr. McDaniel.
Well, the obvious is, you know, there have been limits in compliance with state statute. We always want to make sure that we are doing the right things, particularly as our students are watching for our model. What's the model there? And so I think for us, in terms of truth seeking, and we try to frame it in that sense, and even the way in which we approach justice, the Center for Racism, we approach that very broadly. You know, that's inclusive of public histories, people's past, and understanding the truth around those past. You know, and so I think that we've been very delicate with it, but at the same time, we want all parties to come together. We want what we're doing to serve as a model. As I mentioned, you think about the parties that we're navigating, from the Kirby family descendants to enslaved people's descendants that were on it. Next month, we'll all be meeting them, you know, in one room together. And so I think that this is a moment, a watershed moment in American history, to where we need to stand up and live up to those ideas, you know, that are very much a part of the founding of our country. And so we've stayed true to that from our beginning, making sure that we tell a story that's, first of all, but it's inclusive of all voices, from the Kirby family descendants, the descendants of the enslaved people who were held at the Alta Vista plantation. And so merging all of that together, we want to serve as a model, you know, that we can come together and talk about these very difficult aspects of our history but more importantly, we can join hands together and we can move forward and see brighter days together by understanding, you know, the detours of the past so that we can chart a more inclusive road to the future.
You know, I really agree with you. I think we are far more robust, right? Far more capable of not only discovering and learning, but grappling with this history than at least some lawmakers believe us to be. What about you at Rice, Dr. McDaniel?
I think one connection I see is that this task force work gives us at Rice an opportunity to grapple with, you know, how have we as an academic institution over the long history of the university, you know, contributed perhaps to some of the narratives or lacks of knowledge in our state about the significance of slavery, let's say, in the history of Texas. You know, in the 1920s, one of the lectures that was given here on campus was by Ulrich B. Phillips, who was, of course, notorious among historians of American slavery as someone who contributed to a whitewashed narrative of the history of slavery. You know, when Rice opened its doors, the cornerstone was laid on Texas Independence Day, and there was pageantry that depicted a history of Texas that was as much, you know, mythic as it was rooted in fact. We've had a lot of activism and conversation on campus around the statue of our founder that's on our campus, and you know, many visitors to campus from Houston and Texas and around the world have come to that location and not learned very much about William Marsh Rice and his antebellum history in Texas. And so I think, you know, if people could believe that it was possible to become a millionaire in antebellum Houston without significant connection to slavery, then that shows a lack of understanding of how important and central slavery was to the economic development of the state, and how institutions of all kinds were entangled in these histories of violence and dispossession. So I'm not sure I'm being clear, but I think, you know, part of our role as a university is to think about what role have we played in shaping public understandings or misunderstandings of the history of systemic racism in our state. And then how can the work that we're doing right now contribute to a fuller and more accurate picture?
Yeah, you've touched on something that's really on my mind, which is, you know, how our institutional histories, our institutional reputations also get in the way of our ability to sort of do the work in the spirit, right, that Dr. Robinson sort of underscored for us. I had a curious but important and a long exchange on Twitter over the weekend. I think it just wrapped up this morning with someone here in Baltimore who I know is working on their own approach, right, to the hard history of Johns Hopkins, but also is skeptical, I think, about our ability to do that, our sincerity. This is one of the questions, you know, are we sincere? Is Rice really sincere about this? Is Prairie View really sincere? Do we have the capacities to do, right, what we purport to do? And I wonder, have you encountered skepticism and pushback and folks who are reluctant to sort of join you in the work, and how do we I think do that work of introspection, right, that Dr. McDaniel is suggesting that self-examination. And then, I so wanted to persuade this person on Twitter that, not that I need to be trusted, right? But that we are really working by principles, and that at least offer transparency and the kinds of things that might ultimately win us a different relationship to the community. So I see you both nodding your heads. So maybe Dr. McDaniel, would you mind? And then I'll come to Dr. Robinson. Thank you both.
Well, I think going back to the point about this being the kind of work that universities do, I think when President Simmons said that in 2004 or whenever Brown started, the position of universities in our broader public culture was different, I would suggest, even than it is today, where we're having to establish kind of our first principles as universities and persuade various constituencies that this is work that can still be done, that you can still seek truthful narratives, and that's worth doing. But I think some of that skepticism is rooted, perhaps rightly, in the fact that universities are not only academic institutions, but as I kind of alluded to earlier, we are also wealthy institutions, Rice, private organizations like Johns Hopkins and Rice, that do have an outsized impact on our communities. And we had a lecture as part of our task force series from Devarian Baldwin, who spoke about his book on racial justice and the ivory tower. One of the things he pointed out is that universities are multiple things at once. And maybe some of that skepticism comes from having to be attuned to what aspect of the university we're grappling with at any one time. We're also, I guess I would add, we're also communities that persist through time. We have alumni, we have people who feel a strong sense of connection to the university even after they've gone on to other things. And so universities are complex institutions. I think it would be unrealistic to think that in engaging in these kinds of hard historical conversations, there wouldn't be some skepticism, and there wouldn't be some conflict and some necessary argument and confrontation. If we are really sincere in doing the work, then that's going to be an inevitable part of this process.
Dr. Robinson.
I think for us, our experience has been a little different. As we look at the historical narrative around the establishment of the university, there were a lot of voids. Our early founders were very hesitant to talk about our connections to slavery, that the school was founded on former grounds of a plantation. And so we're trying to restore, these aspects of the narrative in terms of doing our due diligence to tell the whole story. And I think that our public partners are holding us accountable for that. You think about that, our work is very much community centered in the sense that the people that we're working with are giving us their stories so that we are then entrusted to narrate those stories in a certain way that's truthful to them, but more importantly, as a public institution that really transfers that knowledge to the wider public, general public, in a way that's indicative of the human dignity reifying in a sense. And so I think that we've taken that in terms of our ethics and our approach. We've made sure that was front and center from day one. I think that the other side of that is, as we've been approaching this, we've been very sure that we're keeping that inclusivity that we started with as a feature all the way through. Even when we're troubleshooting and when we come up against challenges in terms of gathering data, even our students collecting data and interpreting that data to make sure that that's always our center, that we always come back there And from that place of truth, we always can disseminate that information.
It's a very timely set of reflections. I just want to, I have to wrap this up, but I want to share one of the comments. Asking academics to see beyond their blinders to hold themselves accountable is a lot like asking police departments to reform itself. Hopkins, this is directed at us, as a private institution, has never been accountable to the citizen neighbors. Like really, you noted, a noted research institution just in 2020 looked at the 1840, 1850, 1860 censuses and stumbled upon enslaver status. There is no trust. I thank the commenter and I thank you all for helping us think forthrightly about what I think is a very important facet of trying to do this work. And so I appreciate the commenter setting the bar high, and my commitment today is to aspire to live up to another kind of relationship around this work. Gentlemen, the time has gone too quickly, but I want to thank you both. And I know we've dropped in the chat various places that folks can follow you, check in on your work, tune in, and more. And we all look forward to following your projects. I appreciate the spirit of bringing these two very different kinds of institutions into conversation with us. I know that you've been having those conversations together, but I appreciate you sharing them with us. I also want to thank again our wonderful co-sponsors at the Houston Museum of African American Culture and our friend and Hopkins alum, John Guess. You can follow us at hardhistory.jhu.edu. You can find our YouTube library there for this conversation will appear there shortly, and the others that we have engaged in over the last years. Yes, subscribe to our Stack, Hard Histories JHU.substack.com, where twice a week we show up to share what we're up to in our lab and beyond. Please tune in on March 28th from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern on right here where, well, I shouldn't say not right here, I guess, but at the appropriate link where we'll be joined by Dr. Kim Gallen at Johns Hopkins Medicine, who is directing the Hard Histories Lab this term, and Savannah Wood, the brilliant mind behind the Baltimore Afro Foundation and their archive. We'll be talking about the history of Baltimore as seen through the eyes of both the publishers, the writers, and the readers of the Baltimore Afro. And I really look forward to being in conversation with those two remarkable women. So thank you again, Dr. McDaniel, Dr. Robinson, and to John Guess. And thank you all for coming out today. We look forward to seeing you again very soon.